So Shavua Tov, and we're going to be continuing right now Perek Yud of Sefer Ezra. It's the last Perek. Either way, just to summarize very quickly what we learned mamash last week, we basically said that Ezra HaSofer, when he comes to Yerushalayim and he sees what's going on, and the ministers come over to him and say, you know, we're not as good as you think, religiously, spiritually, and all of the assimilation going on. So Ezra uses, as we saw last week, an act of mourning and tearing his clothes off, plucking the hairs of his head, and falls to the ground. And this drama, and we talked about the drama that is used, affected the many and illustrated to them to look at the bigger picture. And the Jews living in Yerushalayim and the outskirts of Yerushalayim, they realized then that it was necessary to expel their foreign wives in order to restore the Jewish religious character. And we discussed that at length. I also ensured that we understand the timeline, and we had to take a perek from Sefer Nechemya to fill in the gap that exists in between the time that Ezra comes to Eretz Israel, which we said was Chodesh Av. The reason why he came into Yerushalayim in Chodesh Av, because it signified the importance of rebuilding the same month that the Beit Mikdash was destroyed. And then on Rosh Hashanah, he celebrates, and he reads the Torah, and he celebrates Chag HaSukkot. And then we saw that, or we assumed that it made an impression on the Jewish people, reading the Torah after so many years, that they really had no clue what Judaism was all about. And all of a sudden, with the passion that he had, he reads the Torah, and they realize, oh my gosh, we are not living the Jewish life that God wants us to live. And therefore, these ministers approach Ezra and say, Ezra, we need help. And that's basically where our perek comes in. Perek Yud, it's the last perek of Sefer Ezra, Pasuk Aleph. וכהתפלל עזרא, וכהתוודותו בוכה ומתנפל לפני בית האלוהים, נקבצו אליו מישראל קהל רב מאוד, אנשים ונשים וילדים, כי בכו העם הרבה זכר. So Ezra Sofer is praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He both wants the help of Hashem, but also he's trying to make an impression on the people of Israel, on the Jewish people. And he's weeping and confessing the sins of Am Yisrael. And there's a large group that surrounds Ezra. And slowly, more and more people are coming to the mountain where Ezra is, right in front of the Beit HaMikdash, to see what's going on. Men, women, children, they gathered around him, and everyone starts to weep bitterly. The effect of crying is working. And I mentioned last week, similar a little bit to what Mordechai HaYehudi did when he was back up in Bavel, in Nineveh, well, not Nineveh, but in the areas of the Melucha V'Achashverosh, and we saw that it made an impression on the Jewish people there as well. And the same thing is happening here with Ezra Sofer. And all of a sudden, Vayan Shechenya ben Yechiel mibnei Elam, Pasuk Bet, Vayomer le'Ezra, אנחנו מעלנו באלוהינו, ונושב נשים נוכריות מעמי הארץ, ועתה יש מקווה לישראל על זאת. Just going to read Pasuk Gimel and Dalet as well, and I'll go back. ועתה נכרות ברית לאלוהינו, להוציא כל נשים והנולד מהם בעצת אדוני, והחרדים במצוות אלוהינו, וכתורה ייעשה. קום, כי עליך הדבר, ואנחנו עמך, Chazak va'aseh. So I'm just going to translate quickly. Somebody by the name of Nechemya, the son of Nechemya ben Yechiel, from the clan, from the family of Elam, all of a sudden turns to Ezra and he says, it's true, we have broken our emunah, our faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by marrying these foreign women. But even so, he says, there is still hope for Am Yisrael. We must make a brit, a solemn promise to our God that we will send our foreign women with their children away. And we will do what is needed to do to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commandments, and we will do everything we can to be closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then Nechemya says to Ezra, he turns to him directly and said, it is your responsibility to act. Ezra, you, kum, get up. We are behind you. We are following you. Go ahead and get it done. So it worked. Everything that Ezra has done until now was meant for this exact outcome. He wanted, as we mentioned, we worked hard to understand this. Ezra's entire way of manhigut, of his leadership, is to ensure that it comes from the people. Yes, he has the authority that he received from Artaxerxes to do anything he wants. He could rule with a very, very mighty hand, and he can force the people of Israel to follow the rules of the Torah, just like Artaxerxes told him, gave the mandate to do. But instead, Ezra is very, very, very smart. He realizes that when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to the Torah, if we force Am Yisrael, they won't follow with their whole hearts. And we saw that with Ma'amad Har Sinai as well. If you recall, in Har Sinai, right before the giving of the Torah, Am Yisrael say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will listen. But we see that right immediately after they sin. Chet HaEgel and many more of the Chateim, because it didn't really come from them. The Gemara says, Kafa alem al kegigit. They were forced to, whether forced by Kadosh Baruch Hu or Moshe Rabbeinu, or because they saw miracles right before their eyes. How could they turn away? They can't. That's a type of a force. And it didn't really work. And we see that generation sinned so much that they were punished to stay in the desert forever. And Ezra realizes, and we made the connection, and we show the parallelism between Moshe Rabbeinu and Ezra Sofer. Ezra does not want to make that mistake again. He does not want to force Am Yisrael to follow the Torah mitzvot, because he knows that recipe is not a good recipe. He won't succeed. So instead, he manipulates the people of Israel living in Yerushalayim and makes sure that the desire to come closer to Kodesh Baruch Hu comes from them. And you'll note something that I noticed very interesting in Pasuk Yud. In Perek Yud, Perek Tet, if you go back one page, in Perek Tet, Ezra Sofer is talking. First person, right? Nigshu, if you go to Perek Tet, Pasuk Aleph, Nigshu Elai Hasarim, they came to me, and I did, and I cried, right? Pasuk Vav, Nichlamti le'arim Elohai panai, lo azavani, he's speaking. Whereas Perek Yud, the account is being given to us not by Ezra himself, but by somebody who is watching Ezra. Ukehitpalel Ezra, ukehitvadoto boche, nikbetzu elav miYisrael. The one who's telling the story here is somebody who was watching, somebody from the kahal, from the people who are gathering around Ezra. And I think that's hinting to us that Ezra succeeded. He no longer has to speak because it's coming from them. The story is now being told by the people of Israel. And what do they say? We have sinned. We didn't do good. We need to expel our foreign women because they're the reason why, that's the reason for our downfall. Assimilation. we know that from, this is not so much pshat, of course, but we know from many places in Midrashim, ishto ze veito, right? The household is the woman of the house. And children follow Ima, follow the woman many, many times. So if the woman practices idolatry, if the woman of the house is the one who is practicing other types of worship, then it will ruin the home, ruin the house, ruin the religion, Jewish religion. And therefore, Nechemya comes to Ezra and says, you're right. We listen to the Torah. We listen to everything. And you're right. We need to expel our wives. That's the only way to purify Am Yisrael. And they have an idea. They say, Ve'ata nichrot brit le'Eloheinu. Let's make a covenant, a new covenant, a treaty between us and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. But we need help. Ezra, we need you to help us. It is your responsibility. You have the authority. Act. We're behind you. That is every leader's ambition. Every leader's, that's the best Ezra could have done. Had he come with the strong hand and forced it on Am Yisrael, they would have pushed back. But he succeeded in ensuring that it comes from them. He's extremely passive. Ezra in this parak, he's just passive. It comes from them. But the best way to make change is having it come from the people. And that's what they say to him. We need change, and we want you to make that change for us. Now, Pasuk Hey, that begins Vayakom Ezra, he takes advantage of the situation, and he has everybody behind him. And that's a perfect way of starting his leadership. But I noticed something very, very interesting. I don't know if you all caught it, but in Pasuk Bet, when I translated the last sentence of Pasuk Bet, it can be translated in two ways. The people are saying to Ezra, we need to expel our foreign women, our non-Jewish women, right? Vanoshev nashim nochim haaretz ve'ata yesh mikveh liYisrael al zot. Now, the literal translation means, according to Parshanim, is there's tikva. We have tikva. Even though we all intermarried, there's still hope for the Jewish nation. We expel, we get rid of the foreign women and their children, so that now we can marry only Jewish women and have Jewish children as well. But the word yesh mikveh liYisrael can be read a little bit different. What is a mikveh? A mikveh tahara. Not from the shoresh of tikva, hope, but rather a mikvah. Maybe Nechemya is basically saying, he's leaving himself a way out. Yes, we sinned, we need to get rid of our women, but he knows himself that that's a very difficult task to do. You don't just wake up one day and say, the woman I love, I'm going to get rid of. You don't just one day wake up and say, all my children who I love, I'm going to get rid of. Just because they're non-Jewish doesn't mean you don't love them. Just because she's you married her, you got involved with her in the first place because you loved her, right? So it's not easy just to get rid of your women, to get rid of your children. So maybe he's also saying a mikvah. All we need to do is dunk them all into a mikvah and be megayer them. Let's bring them back. Let's convert them to Judaism. That's the best solution. So Nechemya is leaving it up to Ezra. He's saying, we have hope, we can get rid of them, but there are many ways we can do it. We can form a Beit Din, we can convert them, we can put them in the mikvah, or we can divorce them. We need direction. Kum, it's up to you. Kum alecha adavar. We need you to make the decision for us. We need you to help us out because we don't know what to do. We love our women, we love our children. We're not going to get rid of them, but we do realize that they are the obstacle of the Jewish nation flourishing. And we have that exact same problem today. Mamash, today as we breathe right now, we're having the same exact problem. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish families are being torn apart because of the topic of conversions. Do we convert them? Do we not convert them? What about their children? Who are they going to marry? They're going to regular Jewish schools. Some of them going to Dati schools. Yet they all of a sudden realize that they're not even Jewish. What do we do? What's going on in America is even worse with assimilation. They want to be practicing Jews, albeit in a reform stream, being married to non-Jewish women. Is that even possible? What do we do? We are in a big bind. What do we do? Kum, Ezra, you need to help us solve this situation. So on the one hand, he's saying, yes, we want to get rid of our unpure, I'm saying unpure just for the best way of saying unpure women and children, because we need to purify the Jewish nation. But how do we do it? That's where we are now today as well. How do we do that? How do we deal with those hundreds of thousands of families? Here, as we're going to see in a minute in our perek, we're only talking about 113 families. That's it. Now, 113 families is a lot, because it's not just 113 people. It's them and their families and their children. And if their children are not considered Jewish, then their children, then the grandchildren won't be considered Jewish, and their great-grandchildren won't be considered Jewish. And then before you know it, it's not 113 people, but it's thousands, tens and 20s, and maybe 100,000 people who are now intermarrying, and we were losing track of them. And we're going to see in a minute that losing track of the people who intermarried is very, very dangerous. And that's why we'll see it towards the middle to the end of the perek. They decide to make a list of people that are married to non-Jewish women. Just like today, the Rabbanut have blacklists. Unfortunately, there are blacklists. I know this for a fact as a member, the Rabbanut, there are blacklists. And these blacklists basically say, in a special computer, in a special database, say these people are married to non-Jews. And if they want to get married, then they can't get married in Israel, because it's a very big problem, because their children are not, if the woman is not Jewish, then their children are not Jewish. If their children are not Jewish, then they can't get married according to the halacha like Moshe said. They can't, that Moshe. So what do you do? That's where the machloket exists today. Do we convert them and just say do the minimum, or do we say no? You have to fully accept upon yourself 613 mitzvot of Torah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
When did the religion start being according to the women? Because here it's to the men. It's origin to the men. When did it come and be the women now?
Well, no, here it's according to women, because the men are saying we need to get rid of the women because the women are not Jewish. You're right, Arlene. There is a factor that is involved that nowhere in any of these psukim is it mentioned that Jewish women who married non-Jewish men need to get divorced, need to expel their husbands, which comes to say that somewhere before this, possibly when reading the Torah, the Gemara talks about this. I don't want to shy away too much. Maybe we'll do a special shiur on that. But as far as the pshat of the text goes, it's accepted that the women need to be expelled and their children, because the women and their children are not considered Jewish. Now, one of the reasons why we know that is because of edut, because we can give testimony who the mother is, because the midwife and the people around could say, I saw this baby come out of this woman. Whereas you have no clue who the father is. The father is not there when, you don't have the actual proof who they didn't have DNA then. So somewhere along this period, right before this period, it was decided that's how we're going to follow. But you're right, there is a big machloket regarding whether it's father or mother, right? So, but I don't want to go there now, because as far as the perek is concerned, everyone is accepting the fact that we need to get rid of the mothers and their children, because they're the obstacle to Zera Yisrael, as we read last week, right? Zera Kodesh, the holy offspring of Am Yisrael, and there's no answer here. And we're going to see, and I'm going to jump to the end, even at the end of the perek, after they make the long list, the black lists with 113 people, there's no answer. What did they actually do? Did they divorce their wives? Did they convert their wives? It's a very, very difficult situation that Ezra is in. But what he is doing is he's ensuring that it comes from them and that he himself doesn't have to actually come out with a decree. Because if he does that, all chaos will happen. He's not going to succeed. And he succeeds in making sure that it comes from them. They come to him, they approach him, they say, Ezra, we need help. We need your help. Decide for us. What do we do? So the first thing he does is he's going to say, first of all, we need to make a list. We need to know who needs to get divorced or whose family is intermarried so that we can keep track of them and their children. And then once we have a list, then we can start figuring out what has to be done. So that sentence in Pasuk Bet, Yesh mikveh li Yisrael al zot, is obscure, is not understood. Because does it mean we have hope to expel them, or a mikveh we can convert them? Because everyone knows during this time, converting was very difficult. They were ingrained in idolatry, in worshiping other gods. Even the Jewish people themselves didn't even know what it means to be Jewish up until Ezra read the Torah to them. It's a very difficult situation they're in. What would be the laws of converting? What would they have to follow? We know, for instance, that the Shomronim, when we saw this throughout the beginning of Sefer Ezra, a little bit also in Sefer Melachim, when Ashur came and they swapped different nations and they brought the Shomronim to Israel, the Shomronim worshipped both God, the God of Israel, and other gods. So what would stop these women to continue worshiping other gods and also the gods of Israel, just like the Shomronim? How do you convert somebody like that? How do you lishmo, preserve Zera Kodesh of Israel, which is exactly the machloket that exists today in our politics in the question of conversions? Because some of the Rebbeim say we have a problem, we have to solve it, and solving it means being a little bit more lenient. We have hundreds of thousands of families who half of them are Jewish, half of them are not, and they want to live a Jewish life, even though they don't want to live a religious life. Do we accept that? Is that enough? Or do we say no? Israel's not a missionary. We're not a movement to go ahead and convert the world to Judaism. We don't believe in that. If you want to be Jewish, great, but it means you have to accept upon yourself to be a shomer Torah mitzvot, or at least try 613 mitzvot. So what do? So Ezra is in the same exact spot, but what he manages to do, he manages to make sure that it comes from the people and not from his own authority. So Pasuk Hey begins exactly there. Vayakom Ezra. Now he has all of the authority because it comes from the people, not necessarily from Artaxerxes. Yes, Artaxerxes gave him the authority to do whatever he wants, but now he could get up because he has the people behind him. So he takes advantage of that. In a way, I could say I made a note for myself without getting into too much, I don't want to get into politics, but in a way, our prime minister was in the same exact problem. He didn't have the numbers to become prime minister himself, but he succeeded somehow in making sure that the Chavrei Knesset, the government, elected him to become prime minister, even though he was lacking the numbers. He made sure it came from them. He didn't say, I want to be, prime minister. It came from the people. And because it came from the people, even though he didn't have what it took to be prime minister based on elections, he became prime minister because he succeeded in making sure that they chose him to be prime minister. So in a way, Ezra is very, very smart. He did the same exact thing, but very differently, because now we're talking about something spiritual. And spiritually, he succeeded in making sure that it comes from them. And then he can get up and he can actually make a difference. And what does he do? Vayashba, Pasuk Hey, Vayakum Ezra, Vayashba et Sarei HaKohanim, Halviim, V'chol Yisrael, La'asot Kadavar Hazeh, Vayishaveyu. Now, I noticed, and please notice this with me, and I keep on making notes because I keep on seeing it again and again, is that the psukim are unclear as to the actual solution that Ezra chose. Very unclear. It says, V'chol Yisrael la'asot kadavar hazeh. What does kadavar hazeh mean? It could have said, V'chol Yisrael leshalach et hanashim. It could have said, la'asot kfi she'amru. It just says kadavar hazeh, that thing. Which one? Converting, expelling, divorce? Which one? It's unclear. It's unclear. I think the message is because it is such a difficult situation to be in. If I translated this, in loosely translating, it basically means So Ezra began making the leaders of the Kohanim and the Leviim and the rest of the people take an oath that they would do as Nechemya proposed. Well, what did he propose? He just said we have hope, or that we can use a mikvah. So which one? So let's see what happens. Pasuk Daled, Evav. Vayakom Ezra milifnei Beit HaElohim, vayelech el lishkat Yehochanan ben Eliashiv, vayelech sham lechem lo achal umayim lo shata ki mitabel al ma'al hagolah. So what does he do? He goes in front of the Beit HaMikdash into the area of where the Kohanim are, where they lived, the Lishka, right? And what does he do there? He basically spends the night grieving again for everything that had transpired. He doesn't eat and he doesn't drink. And now I understand why this pasuk is here, because it doesn't make sense. What should have been is the solution, that he tells them, okay, this is what you're going to do. You are now going to expel your women, you're going to expel your children, you're going to convert them. But instead, he sits down and he cries. Why? Because he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do. He says, okay, he succeeds in making sure that the Kohanim, the Levim, and the Israelites, they all accept upon themselves to do as Nechemya said, which we don't know what that means. It could be either or. And then he goes and he cries and he grieves because he really doesn't know what to do. What do I do? Do I force families? Do I tear them apart? No one's going to forgive him. It's very easy to talk the talk, to say, yes, we need to expel the women, we need to get divorced, we need to purify our race, right? To say it is very easy, but to actually go home, as you're going home from after this whole gathering in front of the Beit HaMikdash, you go home and your loving wife comes out and gives you a hug and your children run out and say, hey, Abba, so great to meet you. Go say, let's go play ball. And then you say, sorry, I got to get rid of you. You know, there's a difference between understanding that you need to be choser b'tshuva and get rid of non-Jewish offspring, but to do it is very difficult. And the psukim are trying to show us that's what's going on here. It's not a simple thing. Yes, we need to get divorced, even though it's simple, you know, in our minds, it's simple. That's what you have to do. I mean, if I said to everyone here, there's a solution. The Reform movement, or anybody, today's not just Reform, conservative, even the Orthodox world assimilates in America and you know, England, whatever, right? And yes, they need to get rid of their foreign wives, get rid of those Christians that you married, right? Just get rid of them and come back to Judaism. It's nice to say it, but tachlis, you're breaking people's hearts, you're breaking people's families apart. That's very, very difficult. But that's the only way. What are you going to do? They're not going to want to convert. Your wife and your children don't want to convert to Judaism. What do you do? That's where we are. So there's no concrete, you know, there's nothing that the psukim tell us this is what they did. You know, Vayelech Avram. It doesn't say that. It says, I don't know. So he goes and he grieves and he cries again. He needs Hashem's direction. Pasuk Zayin. Or it could be also that here, if I continue what our theme from last week, he's continuing his drama of crying again so that he doesn't have to make the decision for Am Yisrael, so that they themselves decide to either divorce and expel their women. We saw he makes an impression on people. He's a big, important person, you know, hired, appointed by Artaxerxes, the ruler of Persia, huge, very big king. And maybe instead of just, going ahead and telling them decree of get rid of your women, he cries again because he doesn't really want to make the decision for them. Maybe he wants them, each family, to make a decision by themselves, to decide for themselves what to do, to get rid, to convert. I don't know. Either way, it seems to me that the psukim are purposely very vague. Pasuk Zayin, Vayaviru kol b'Yehuda v'Yerushalayim lechol b'nei hagolah leikabetz Yerushalayim. Again, this is not Ezra talking. A message was sent throughout all of Yerushalayim and Yehuda to all those who returned to come to Yerushalayim so that maybe the people can come to some kind of resolution. So maybe the people can make a decision, because Ezra is through agony, mamash agony. He's crying and grieving. He doesn't know what to do. He knows what should be done. He knows what the only thing that can be done, but tachlis, it's very, very hard to actually do. So the people themselves realize that we need to find a solution. So they call everyone to come to Yerushalayim. And it takes 3 days. Pasuk chet. וכל אשר לא יבוא לשלושת הימים כעצת השרים והזקנים יאחורם כל רכושו והוא ייבדל מקהל הגולה. They're so eminent. They want it to happen so much. They want everybody to be there, because it has to be, everyone is in this. Everyone has to make the decision together, because that's the power of Am Yisrael. We all have to agree. We need to make a decision together of what to do in this terrible situation that we are all in. And therefore, anybody who does not come to Yerushalayim to talk about this terrible situation we're in, we are going to put them in cherem, just to force people to come, in order for the leaders of the people to come and do what has to be done. So within 3 days, it happens. Vayikabtzu, pasuk tet. Vayikabtzu kol anshe Yehuda ובנימין ירושלים לשלושת הימים הוא חודש התשיעי ב-20 בחודש וישבו כל העם ברחוב בית האלוהים מרעידים עד הדבר ומהגשמים. So within 3 days, on the 20th day of the 9th month, so what is the 9th month? We're talking about Hebrew dates. Kislev, Kaf Kislev, okay? That's the 9th month, right? Chodesh HaShvi'i is Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. Chodesh HaShemini is Cheshvan, Kislev. So on Kaf Kislev, everyone comes together to Yerushalayim. It was raining very hard at the time, just to show that there's a connection to Hashem. Rain, we know, signifies connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do we know that? Because Dafka, in the month of Cheshvan, we start asking for Gshamim, and we say, V'haya im shamoah tishma. When we listen and do what we are supposed to do, Hashem gives us matar. He gives us Geshamim, right? It was raining hard because of the weather, and then it's important, and everyone's trembling. It just shows that there's something positive going on within the people of Yerushalayim and the Golah. Something is happening. There's a connection forming between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. They don't know what to do, but they are striving to do the right thing. Ezra is striving to do the right thing. He doesn't know the actual answer, because Tachlis, sometimes there's no one answer for all. Tearing apart families has its own consequences. But on the other hand, keeping non-Jewish offspring who do not want to convert also has consequences of Zera Kodesh. So what do? So they all come to Yerushalayim on Kaf Kislev. What happens? Pasuk Yud. Finally, everyone is there. This is Ezra's moment. This is what he was waiting for. This is the test. What kind of leader are you, Ezra? What are you going to do? You finally have the attention of all of the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael. The Beit HaMikdash is built. We have Kohanim, we have Leviim, we have Meshorerim, as we saw in the last couple of prakim. Now's your moment. What mark are you going to leave on Am Yisrael? So he gets up. Vayakom Ezra. Now he can take charge, since they gave him the authority. They are looking up to him. He succeeded. He's not coming from Bavel and saying, I was given the authority to do what I want, but rather they want him to make decisions for them. Vayomer aleihem, pasuk Yud, atem me'altem, vatoshivu nashim nochliyot lehosif al ashmat Yisrael. Ezra, he says, and he's mentioned here as a Kohen. He's not ever mentioned as a Kohen. Why is he mentioned here as a Kohen? Couple of reasons, but the reason that I like most, because Aharon HaKohen was Ohev Shalom verodef Shalom. Maybe here the Kohen aspect is added to Ezra, not because he's taking the place of a Kohen Gadol now. He's not a Kohen Gadol. He's not from the Zera of a Kohen Gadol. And we don't see him acting as a Kohen anywhere. He's a spiritual guide, but he's called here as Ezra HaKohen. And again, it's not him, right? It's finally him speaking. Unlike up until now, it was the account of someone else seeing him. Now he gets up as a Kohen is Rodef Shalom. He's trying to do the right thing. What does he say to them? He says, he stands up and he speaks and he says, you have been faithless, unfaithful to Hashem. You brought guilt and you married foreign women. He's saying it as it is. And it came from them. Nechemya and the others said, that's where we are. Ve'ata, he says, finally, a solution. Ve'ata. Tenu toda la'Adonai Elohei avotechem va'asu retzono. Confess your sins to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and do what Hashem wants you to do. Hibadlu me'amei ha'aretz umin hanashim hanochoyot. He is taking a stand, finally. What does he say? Separate yourselves from the foreign women that you're living with in our land. Get rid of them. Hibadelu. Do you remember where that word hibadlu is mentioned elsewhere in our Torah? Where does the word hibadlu come from? It comes from Korach ve'adato. Hibadlu lachem. Separate yourself from Korach ve'adato because they are going to die. You need to separate from those kinds of people. Non-believers. Korach. Used here, hibadlu. It's very, very powerful. We need to get rid of them. We need to take them. We need to lishmor al zera kadosh. So finally, Ezra takes a stand. It's not converting them. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Pasuk Yud Bet. Vayanu kol hakahal vayomru kol gadol. Ken ki dvarecha aleinu la'asot. The people shouted out, and the answer is, yes, we will do whatever you say. Everything worked out for Ezra. He managed, with all of the authority that he had, he managed to ensure that it comes from them. They gave him the authority, not Artaxerxes, and he acts in mourning to show how he cares about them. He's seen as a Kohen, Ohev Shalom, Verodef Shalom, and he tells them straight out, without any illusions, you sinned, you married women that you can't marry, you're ruining Judaism, you must get rid of them. Hibadlu, just like with Koach ve'adato. And the answer, yes, we agree. But then, Pasuk Yud Gimel comes. Aval. But, Aval, where have you ever seen in the entire Torah? Where? Nowhere. Only here. Aval. Yes, Ezra, yes, but. Very small, but very, very important. Aval. Ha'am rav. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Aval ha'am rav. והעת גשמים ואין כוח לעמוד בחוץ. והמלאכה לא ליום אחד ולא לשניים, כי הרבינו לפשוע בדבר הזה. All of a sudden they realized what they just said. They realized, I have to go home to my wife who's going to be coming out, with a hug and with a nice piece of steak for me to eat for dinner. And I have to say goodbye. Wait a minute. Now it's starting to sink in. Wait a minute, Ezra, we get it. You're right, but the crowd is too big. We can't do it here. Not here. It's raining. We can't do it here. We can't stand here open like this. This is something that's not going to take 1 day or 2 days. It's going to take a while. Let's think about this a little bit. Let's organize. Let's put it together. You know what? I know that you want us to do it right now, but le'at. Let's do it properly. In other words, let's push it off for another day. Because, like I said, the psukim beforehand were already hinting to where we're going. The solution, whatever solution it is, no solution is a good solution. To tear out and break apart families, that's hard. Even though everyone knows that that's the right thing to do. Wait a minute. And they even mask it by saying, Ki hirbinu lifshoa. We know we're wrong. We know we went too far. Right? We know we're involved in sin for too long. We get it. We're not disagreeing with you, Ezra, but a little slow. Don't like hold off for a little bit. And then Pasuk Yudalid. Ya'amduna sareinu lechol hakahal, lechol asher be'areinu, ha'oshiv nashim nochriyot, yavo, לעתים מזומנים ועמהם זקני עיר ועיר ושופטיה, עד להשיב חרון אף אלוהינו ממנו עד לדבר הזה. Let our officials, let's let some officials stay in Yerushalayim. They'll take charge of the matter. Then we'll let anyone who has a foreign wife come to us. They'll tell us what's going on, what they did. Did they actually get married? Did they not get married? Are they just living with her, not living with her? We'll have judges to determine what the real situation is. That way, God's anger over the situation will be slowly diminished because he sees that we're trying really hard. Again, in other words, basically, it's the famous Jewish cup, right? Let's find a solution of not actually finalizing a solution. Let's just push it off with very big words. Ach, tetva. But all of a sudden, ach, not aval. At that moment, people are not stupid. People know what's going on here. Ach, Yonatan ben Asahel, pasuk tetvav, v'Yachazia ben Tikva. Amdu al zot. No, wait a minute. I see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to delay. You're trying to make sure it never happens. Shulam v'shabtai alavi azarum, and more people started gathering, saying, wait a minute. If we start delaying, it's never going to happen. Pasuk tetzayin, vayasuchen bnei hagola. ויבדלו עזרא הכהן אנשים ראשי האבות לבית אבותם לכולם בשמות וישבו ביום אחד לחודש העשירי לדריווש הדבר. So all of a sudden it's decided that they're going to take upon themselves a couple of months to start making the lists, putting together an organized panel, some judges to figure out what's going to go on. And then finally in Pasuk Yud Zayin, it took them 3 months to do this. ויחלו בכל אנשים ההושיבו נשים נוכריות עד יום אחד לחודש הראשון. From Kislev to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. 3 months, right? Tevet, Shvat, Adar, and then Rosh Chodesh Nisan. 3 months pass, and they finally have a list. They went all over the place. They have lists and lists and lists of people that are married, who are intermarried to non-Jewish women. This is not new. On Shabbat, this past Shabbat, I gave a shiur between Mincha and Arvit, all about the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael versus Chutz La'aretz. And it's not new that I personally, I think that all Jews should make Aliyah. I believe that in my whole heart. I think we need that today more than ever. And I know that we can do copy and paste from this to Aliyah as well. A lot of people know they should make Aliyah, but they take their time. Not ready, I'm not ready yet. Let's make lists of things that I have to do first. Let me pay off my debts. Let me do this. Let me make sure that I finish college and then I'll make Aliyah. And then others say, let's make an organization, and we have Nefesh B'Nefesh. We'll have an organization that will help us, that will put things together for us, that will make sure that we have an easier time to make Aliyah. But do they actually make Aliyah? Most people don't make Aliyah. This past Yom HaAtzmaut, I think the cutoff is that there's still about 6 million Jews living in America, which is about half of what we have which is half of a Jewry in the world. We have about 6 million in Israel as well. So this is not new. The tactic of delaying, the tactics of let's make lists, the tactic of, let's figure out what we can do in order to not do anything. It's a Jewish way, it worked that way for 2,000 years until Herzl came along and said, you know what, let's just finally just do something. And he did it. And he went ahead and he did something. And because of that, we have a Medina. If it wasn't for Herzl, we wouldn't have a Medina, right? We need a pusher. We need somebody to go ahead and go and do something. And they were expecting that Ezra HaSofer will be that person. You see, the Jewish people, they know themselves very well. They know. You have all these people that says, wait a minute, we can't, aval. And then we have other people that says, no, but if it doesn't happen, it's not going to happen. It's the machloket of the Yahadut. And they're expecting Ezra to go ahead and do a maaseh, be a Herzl, go ahead and make a decision. Unfortunately, Ezra doesn't do that. Because from now on, from Pasuk Yudchet all the way to the end of the Sefer, Pasuk Mem Daled, is a list. It's a list of 113 mishpachot. A list of 27 families of Kohanim and Levim, 86 families of the rest of Am Yisrael that are intermarried. Them and their children. And that is exactly how the parak ends. If we skip to Pasuk Mem Daled, the last Pasuk of our parak, all it says, Kol ele nashim nochliyot, v'yesh mehem nashim, vayasimu banim. That's how the parak ends. And then immediately afterwards, what do we have? Parak Aleph of Sefer Nechemya. So what happened? That's the point of this parak. Nothing happened. And we see that Nechemya has the same exact problem later on as well that we're going to see. Intermarriage. This is a very terrible situation that we're in. And there's no solution today either. We see with the gerut, conversions, we see with assimilation, what's the answer? We're going to lose millions and millions of Jews? We're going to cut them off? But if you bring them in, who's to say who's Jewish and who's not Jewish? That's where Ezra is today, in a much smaller scheme, right? It's a smaller situation. But that's where we are 2,500 years ago. Nothing's changed, right? Ezra gets up. Vayakum Ezra. And he tells them what has to be done. But he doesn't do it. He doesn't go ahead and actually do it. People asked me what I think about Herzl. I said, Herzl is probably the closest thing that we had to a Mashiach. I know it's crazy because the guy was a total non-religious Jew in every possible way, right? Almost assimilated even. Didn't even know what the Tanakh, nothing. He was an intelligent man, but he had nothing to do. And Dafka, that person, is the one that said, I'm going to do, not going to say, I'm going to do. In all the conventions in Basel and other places, people were talking and talking and talking and talking, and he went in and he did. That's what we need today. We need somebody who does. Ezra was a spiritual leader. He wasn't an ish maaseh. Dun, dun, dun. That's where Nechemya comes in. That is Sefer Nechemya. Enters Nechemya in Perek Aleph, a whole different animal, a different kind of a leader than Ezra is. Ezra, a great leader, established spiritually, convinced an entire nation of what they know they need to do. They know what they need to do. They know what's right, and they know right from wrong. They want to be good Jews. They want to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They say that right outright. They say that we know that we sinned. We know that we're not living a good life. We know it. But we need somebody to actually help us move from knowledge to action. So Ezra's koach, Ezra's ability could only take him thus far. But without him, Nechemya doesn't have a chance. Without the planting the seeds in the minds of all the Jewish people, Nechemya doesn't have a chance. Now that Ezra planted and set the stage, Nechemya could come and take it from there and start being an ish ma'aseh, and that's exactly who Nechemya is. So we're not done with Ezra yet, and I'm going to wait for next week or in 2 weeks to summarize, to give him more of a global outlook at who Ezra really was and everything that he did on the pshat level in our sefer, because that's how we're going to understand how Nechemya can succeed and continue this holy work that Ezra had done. So Ezra and Nechemya come together, and we'll see how they have to be together, because each one has a different type of a job to do. Two legends, yet two types of leadership that is very necessary for Am Yisrael. And in a way, we have that also in Medinat Israel, although it's just not successful. We have the Rabbanut HaRashit, and we have the Memshalah. But unfortunately, with all the machlokot that we have, it's not working. But Be'ezrat Hashem, with prayer, with with true emunah and desire to really make a dent and try to make change, hopefully we'll succeed one day, Be'ezrat Hashem. So coming back to our sefer, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, Sunday, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will start a new leader called Nechemya ben Chachilya. So, Shavua Tov.